everything else here. Tim just served on the finance and administration team for quite a while. He's also served as a church business administrator for many years, and it's just been a huge blessing to our churches, and works one-on-one with churches often, so does that as well. So let's pray, and then we'll get started. Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your love. Lord, thank you for your mercies. And Lord, you call us to be good stewards. And so I thank you for each one here, as many of them work as the bookkeeper or the treasurer or the stewardship person here. Sometimes we have other pastors as well, just trying to make sure that we understand the whole process. And so, Lord, whatever our specific needs are, I pray that we would gain that understanding, and that you would be lifted up and glorified through this. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, there is a white handout, and it says EFCER's 403B pension plan. And if you're not aware, we just had a massive changeover to a new, actually our whole plan. So we had a very antiquated plan, and I talk about it in our report on Monday. But basically, our plan was established in 1948, which is when Israel became a nation again, for a little bit of perspective. And each time, when you have 401ks or 403bs, it's like, does our plan have like a 403b option? We say no, because our plan was established way before 401ks even existed. And we were not allowed to convert. Well, about 2 years ago, Congress passed some legislation that allowed us to be able to convert, and we discovered that as we were shopping through with a new record keeper, and they said, oh yeah, we've done that many times, and so they made that change for us. So we have a new provider, it's NWPS, but anyway, what has not changed? It's not changed at our churches for all full-time pastors. Their pension, we contribute 12% of their salary to that, and compensation, so it's your salary and housing allowance is normally that you base your 12% on. If you have a parsonage provided, then you're supposed to take the salary and bump it up by 30%. Because otherwise we're not comparing apples and oranges in terms of providing for a pastor's retirement in the future. So I'm very thankful that back in 1948, our delegates and pastors and leaders had the insight to say, you know what, we don't want our pastors to serve at all these different churches over 20, 30, 40 years and then come and say, I don't have any retirement, because some churches maybe didn't see that as a priority. So we all as delegates said we need to do that. So what has changed? You can elect to have additional money go in pre-tax. And so your taxable salary is reduced, and the reality is it might help the pastor save up to 30% of savings, tax savings. So if they put in $2,000, they probably may see $600 saved on their taxes. So to me, whenever that's an option, I think that's a good thing. Also, they can, Roth IRAs are a big popular item. You can also do a Roth IRA. If you do a Roth IRA, you do that with post-tax dollars. So you pay on that full $2,000, but then it goes into that Roth IRA, and that's a tax advantage when it comes out. So what's the difference between a 403b and a Roth? I just wrote that down. It just depends when you're taxed. Here's the reality. When people say tax-free, you always pay tax. It's just, am I going to pay it now or later? So I thought maybe I'd just put this little diagram there. The 403b is you don't pay it now, but you will pay for that. It's taxable later. If you get a Roth IRA, you pay on the tax now, but then all of it comes out later tax-free. So that's the only difference. I know Dave Ramsey really pushes Roth IRAs, and then I just wrote, which is better? And it depends. Will you have a higher tax rate later, or do you have a higher tax rate now? And who's going to know what it is later? So you really don't know. But one of the things is they do get it, the interest earnings are also tax-free for a Roth IRA. So maybe that has a little bit of advantage, I don't know. But the savings tax election form, I think is on the back of that page, is that correct? Or no, that just says other. If your pastor needs one, Marie can get it, but I do have a few extras that I just printed there if you want to elect. But if your pastor wants to do that, they should fill out this form, give a copy to, if you're the treasurer, give it to the treasurer, and then also send a copy to Marie at Eastern Region. We need to have that as well. So I put that down. We just call it savings rate election form. So that's what they call it. So that's there. And then for changes for the treasurer, a number of you, if you had to work through the process, thank you. For some of you, it's been a little bit of a challenge. So if you did, I'm seeing some of those smiles there. So, but you have to, you do it online, and it has been, it's not been the best transition. I'm just going to say the short-term pain, hopefully the long-term gain is going to be worth it there. So, and the only other question was, you can change beneficiaries online. When we made the transition over, the beneficiary information did not go over. So some of our pastors are panicking, like, wait, you don't have the beneficiary information, but we have beneficiary information already in our office. But if you make changes, then you can make those online, and we will just update that as well for us. So we have a few churches, and if I discover any of them, we've just had a few that haven't made the transition and started making those payments. So we have to make sure that that happens here soon. So any questions on that 403B change? All right. Tim, I'm going to let you come and share. Which is the main thing. Mine's my kind of a commercial. Yours is the real deal. So Tim, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Good morning. I wanted to see all of you. I got to talk to most of you as you came in, so I'm glad you're attending this little session with us this morning. And we want to kind of do some interaction and make this a little fun, but we haven't invited Jesus yet. So could we just take a minute and have a word of prayer? Our Father, we thank you for who you are, for your lordship, and we know that all that we do within the church is because of you. So now we ask your presence in this meeting. We ask again for your binding us in fellowship, and also in giving us your wisdom. In Jesus' name. Okay, as Ed said, I am part of the finance and administration team. I'm also the contact person that helps local churches when they need assistance with some of their finances. I've been able to help several churches either by phone or the internet, or I've visited several churches that are just going through a transition in terms of maybe a change in leadership, a treasurer that's been there for a long time and then they've retired, and changing software, or just a number of different issues. And so we want, as a team, to come alongside you and assist when you have those questions and you have those needs. Clark, who you know is our moderator, isn't that your title now, moderator?
Yep. Whatever title.
Is also on the finance administration team, and he is going to be able to answer any question that I'm not able to. So keep that in mind. We're going to quickly, we only have a little over half hour, but I want to talk a little bit about how we are doing in our church finances. And I'm calling this checkup time. And I know when we talk about working in finances, working on all this stuff. It isn't the most fun stuff always, and the most glamorous, but how we do our finances at the local church level is so important because it's part of that foundation of the church. And for the church to be a healthy and a growing church, I very strongly feel that its finance and its procedures have to have a very good, solid foundation. So we are going to look at a few things today in terms of, are we doing our best? Scripture tells us, whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Are we doing our best? Are we doing everything with excellence in our church finances? Are we giving thanks for what the Lord is doing and will do? So are we approaching our finances from that standpoint of excellence? What is the best way to do things? Are we honoring the Lord in how we do it? So we decided to come up with, well, how do we know how we're doing? How do we find out where we're at? How do you find out about your health? When you want to find out something about your health, what do you do?
Doctor.
And what does the doctor do? Test. They give you a checkup, don't they? And if you're like me, I have to go at my age now every 4 to 6 months and have a checkup. And they check out and this and that and take my blood and all that stuff and determine if I'm doing okay. So you have to have some set of testing, some set of criteria of how do we check up on ourselves? How do we know how we are doing? There is one important piece of paper that you will get, and I didn't put it back there. Can anybody guess why I didn't put it back there?
Didn't want us to look at it.
You got it. You'd be doing this the whole time because it's a yes or no kind of thing, and I'm going to give you time at the end to do that. So, and you also have a handout there on checkup on church financial procedures. This is going to be based on the checklist that you're going to be receiving. But we don't have time to do the whole checklist. So I have pulled out a few things that I thought are important. Also, these seem to be the common ones that have come up in my work with the local churches where they have needed some help. And these are broken down into about 4 or 5 categories. The first one is the legal compliance category. And I want to talk a minute about your 501c3 status. Does everyone know what that means when I say 501c3? Okay. That means the Internal Revenue has recognized you as a local church to be a tax-exempt organization as far as not having to pay income tax. It also gives you the ability to give tax-deductible receipts. And so it puts you in that category of being in favor with the IRS. If you are a church, it also gives you that position where you don't have to file an annual tax return. But you do have to do some things because you have been granted that 501c3 status that you have to do as an employer, as a church. So this is kind of easy, but yet it can be complicated. How did you get your 501c3 status? Anybody tell me?
I believe it came through Eastern Region.
Eastern Region, okay. Anybody else have experience where you went another route? No, okay. So, the key here is that, yes, you can fall under the EFCER group exemption status. But the question that comes up, I was dealing with a nonprofit a couple years ago that they were being questioned by the Attorney General of the state of Ohio, and why they hadn't been filing things and why they hadn't been doing things. And one of the things they wanted to know was proof of nonprofit or tax exempt status. So we had to dig out for years back in some old files to find the letter that was granted that status. So how many of you know where your letter is at the church that tells you that? 3 of you? How do you, the rest of you, how do you know you have it if you don't know where the document is? So somebody told you?
I've seen it.
You've seen it?
When I go to a business and ask for tax exemption, they give it to me.
Yeah, but this is not quite the same thing. You're talking about sales tax there, Don.
Oh.
That is, you're on the right track. What I would encourage you to do is, if you don't know readily where the copy of the letter is, that you are on the status with EFCER group exemption, that you get that from Canton office. Can they do that, Ed?
Yes, and every year we update it, and any churches affiliated with us are, they're
But
listed.
I personally recommend that you have that in your files, not in your, and then, you know, if you're, some churches, they file things yearly and then it gets put away for 10 years and nobody knows where it is. Put it in a place you know where it's going to be at. Something where you maybe keep other important documents, like your incorporation papers, your insurance policy, that kind of thing. You need to know where that is, because you never know when you're going to have a question on that. Could even be from one of your parishioners wanting to see, if I give to this, how do I know that I'm giving to a tax exempt organization? Okay, EIN numbers quickly. Everybody knows what EIN stands for? No shaking no, so I assume you do. Do you have your EIN numbers for all the local levels that you need to have them for? Whether it's on the federal level, the state, and the local, okay? I've worked with some churches that they may have done the federal, but they've never done anything with the state. They've never done anything with the local municipality in terms of registering. Ohio, a couple of years ago now, has a law that municipalities you have to register as an employer with the municipalities if you're in a municipality, such that you have an obligation as an employer to register and get an EIN number from them and file tax returns with them as you do the state and the federal. So, corporate status. What do I mean by corporate status?
Registered with the state.
Okay, where?
As a, you know, as an incorporation, or have you registered?
Okay.
We have to update that every year.
Not every year.
Well, we do in Virginia.
Okay, in Virginia maybe.
Yeah.
Non-profit corporation status. let's see a show of hands. Can everybody tell me for sure they know where their certificate is, that the church is a nonprofit organization that has been registered by the state? Not too many hands. I would investigate that, make sure you know where you have that at, whether you have ever done it. One of the things that I have found several times in the last couple of years with churches is, yeah, they initially signed up for it 10, 20 years, 15 years ago, but they let it lapse. It has to be renewed.
Don't they send us out a letter? It has to be renewed.
Well, they do, but you know what happens? What happens in churches? You change names a lot, don't you? And for example, in the state of Ohio, as part of your corporate status, you have to have a statutory agent on file by name, which the state has the name of that person and the address of that person as their contact. If it's the treasurer, if it's your finance team chairperson, whoever it is, if they change and move away or whatever, the state's going to send that letter to somebody that's no longer connected with the church, and it's going to get lost in the mail. And I've seen that happen several times where a church has let their corporation status lapse because they never got, the right person didn't get the renewal. So in Ohio, just remember every 5 years that it has to be renewed. And you can do that online. It's very easy to go under the Ohio Secretary of State and do a lookup of corporations. Just give the name of the church, how it's incorporated, and it will tell you whether you are inactive or whether you are active or whether you are canceled. So you need to check that out, and if you find that you need to renew that, you can even do that online. Real quick, while I'm on that, is another issue that I don't necessarily have on the handout, but there has been a lot of confusion I've had with some churches on workers' compensation. You need to make sure that you are enrolled for workers' compensation in your various state. That's very important. Some churches aren't aware of that, I find. And so, we have to go through that process. In the state of Ohio, the pastor is considered elective coverage. In other words, under state law, the pastor does not have to be covered under workers' compensation. But, am I right, Ed? EFCER recommends that all pastors be covered under workers' compensation.
Yes, because if they get hurt on the job, you have that
So if you get
protection.
hurt on the job, they've got that coverage. So, but they have to be specifically named by whatever their first and last name is on your policy as an elective person, because you are electing to cover your pastor. They have to have the name of that pastor, pastors in their system in order for them to be covered. And then when you do your annual reports, that specific pastor's name will come up for you to enter the wages to that particular individual. Then there's another classification for all their employees. The pastors are separate.
Some states, they don't cover the pastors. Like,
Depends on what
I'm
state.
from New York, and they don't,
I'm not sure.
and they don't, this city.
I'm not
That's
sure.
the
I
wrong
have
color.
done New York a little bit, but you just need to investigate that for sure. That you, and every state that I have looked at, it's always through the Secretary of State. And they all have websites and you can go in and find that information. Now, it could be in other states where pastors are automatically covered, but you just have to know that by state. But I do know in Ohio that has been a problem because they have to be individually listed. Okay, clergy compensation. That is the yellow handout that you have. I did let you pick that one up. And that's front and back. And that also can be a little confusing because pastors have what we call dual status, which means for Social Security purposes, they are self-employed. For income tax purposes, they are an employee. So as the church, as the employer, has the legal responsibility to distinguish that. And then there are all kinds of questions of, well, who can actually be designated clergy? And that becomes a kind of a tough issue. I have worked with some churches where they wanted to designate practically everybody on the staff as a clergy member so that they could get that benefit. That can be a little bit touchy. In that handout, there is a publication that you can look under Internal Revenue that specifically says the qualifications for someone to be considered a pastor. And specifically along with that, whether they can take a housing allowance, which, as you know, is not taxable for income tax. They still have to pay Social Security tax on their housing, but not income tax. The other thing about clergy compensation is you cannot withhold Social Security from them. You cannot pay that for them. You cannot match them as regular employees. You would match that and send it in. You can't do that. Legally, they are self-employed for Social Security. They have to deal with that themselves. They can do that through the church if they want more withholding taken out, but you don't call it Social Security, you call it withholding tax. So that's important to keep that in mind as well when you are doing clergy compensation. If the church decides that they want to help out the pastor and pay part of their Social Security, that's okay. But that has to be considered in addition to their salary, and it has to be included in their W-2 at the end of the year. So, I know that's quick. I know that's been a problem for a lot of our churches, but come back to me sometime if you need help with that. Along with that is designations and minutes. In order for for the pastor to, or in the cases of the other employees for professional expenses, to have those kind of benefits, you have to have those designated once a year and minuted whatever your governing body is. And usually in EFCDR, it's congregational meeting that those need to be minuted at, okay? The pastor decides how much he wants to declare, how much it's going to cost him as to maintain his home, or if he's in a parsonage, how much it's going to cost him for expenses in the parsonage. He can declare that housing allowance, but it has to be approved by the governing body. That amount does not show up on his W-2 as income, but shows up on another line that says housing allowance. the important to remember that is when I've had churches that have trouble with this too, when you file your 941 quarterly, you do not report the housing allowance on 941. You only report what his salary amount is. I know that that's a lot, and we can't cover it all, but go ahead.
Did you say that's once a year, and would that be, even if it doesn't change, it'd still be once a year?
I think technically if it doesn't change, but I always recommend that you do it once a year because you don't lose sight of it, okay? And
I would add, often the elder board would just have it minute in their elder minutes or administrative council minutes, not
Somewhere.
necessarily the congregation
Yeah.
would need to approve that each time.
But it does need to be designated, and it needs to be minuted. Likewise, their professional expenses, everybody knows what I mean when I say professional accountable reimbursement expenses. That either the pastor or the staff can take in accordance with when they do ministry, whether it be mileage or subscriptions or dues or that kind of thing. Those are professional expenses. And if the church has agreed to pay those over and above the salary, that's fine. But those also technically are supposed to be minuted. I have examples up here if you want to see of how both the housing and professional expenses should be minuted. Now, you don't have to turn those in to the IRS, you don't have to do anything with them, but in case the church ever gets audited, you have to say, yes, here's the declaration, here they are minuted, okay? And
I was gonna say, can you address that some churches still are like giving a car allowance or those type of things versus the health reimbursement, I mean, the
yeah.
expense reimbursement plan?
Yeah, it's called an accountable reimbursement plan, which means there are certain, as I talked about, what they can turn in as an expense that are considered part of doing ministry. And the church has adopted that policy that they are going to pay professional expenses on a reimbursement basis. So after the staff member has accumulated those expenses, they turn those in and they are reimbursed for those expenses. That is versus having a church pay a car allowance per se with no accountability for it. That's where that word accountable comes in. That's why we recommend that it be on a reimbursement basis. If you do give a cash advance for something, it has to be reconciled or accounted for. I believe it's within 60 days of the allowance. So that's the difference, because otherwise Internal Revenue could say, well, you gave the pastor $150 a month car allowance. How do we know they spent it on the car? You know?
I got a question. Excuse me. One of our line items on our annual budget that I keep record of is past his business expenses. You know, we give an amount and then we deduct. He gets actual mileage, phone allowance, you know, whatever that comes out of that. And that's voted on by the congregation every year.
Yes.
So is that the same thing as being approved every year?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Because that would be minuted
Yes.
someplace, yeah.
I'm new to the church, I've only been there 7 weeks, but in my contract that the elder signed in a meeting with me when I went to the church, it does have that in the contract as far as how much is housing, salary. Is that adequate? I'm not sure that it's been voted on in congregational business.
Yeah.
You know, the contract may have been approved, but I'm not aware of that.
It depends probably, Ed, wouldn't you think, on who signs the contract? But I would go safe side and have that minute at some meeting. So
Just in the elder meeting or whatever.
So
So
that
often
it-
churches don't have disclosed the specifics on compensation, so the congregation would not be.
somewhere, because it's one thing to have a contract, it's not another thing to be acted on in a business meeting. Okay, we're gonna have to keep moving here. The second page, I have a little bit, talk about internal control. Separation of duties. If you don't know what that is, that means the person that handles the income should not be the same person that handles the disbursements and writes the checks. That is just a good accounting principle that's also in our faith and practice. And that's why we encourage churches to have one person designated as the financial secretary, the other person as the treasurer, or whatever you are going to call them. But there are separate people. Now, several of the churches I have worked with, there has been a disconnect there between the financial secretary and the treasurer. The financial secretary does their thing and records their stuff to give people receipts. The treasurer does their thing and records them in their whatever system they're using as income, but they never see if they mesh. They never see if they're using the same numbers. So there has to be some kind of coordination between those two so that you are consistent in reporting what income the church is receiving. Because I've seen treasurers get a tally sheet from either the financial secretary or whoever counts the money, and they record it completely different from what the financial secretary has recorded in their records. That doesn't mesh, okay? Because we need to be consistent between the two. That also is giving importance to the financial secretary, because they are the person that has been elected by the church, whatever title they have, that they are responsible to account for and record all the income of the church. And so when I talk to different churches, a lot of them have kind of put the financial secretary on the back burner. They're really not that important. The treasurer really has to make sure they're on top of things. Financial secretary is very important because they need to keep a very accurate record of income. And because they might have, depending on what system you use, what software you use, they might have different reports that they can share with the finance people that the treasurer doesn't have access to. I've seen treasurers that they can't give a range of giving, such as 20 people gave over $500 this month, or we have 2 people in the church that gave over $10,000 this year. Sometimes when you're looking for funding, a bank for a loan or something, they want that information. So that's why it's important that the financial secretary keep accurate income records so that not only they coordinate with the treasurer, or when you need to have a specific report on the income, that you have that. Okay, so that's been a little bit of a problem, but it's just something that you need to be aware of. We're going to move real quick here, so we're kind of running out of time. Part of the recording process is the difference between accounts and funds. And you should all be aware that we are asking churches, and Internal Revenue asks churches to use a fund accounting system so that you are recording things like funds. That is different than accounts. Can somebody tell me the difference real quick between a fund and an account?
I don't know if this is right, but for us, the account is based on our budget and how we developed our budget, and our funds would be designated monies that come in for specific things that don't fall under the storehouse. Is that correct, or is that really?
Almost.
Almost.
Okay, almost. Anybody else want to add, jump on there?
Well, a fund may not necessarily be a designated account.
No, you're on the right track. Funds are what people are giving to. So, give me an example of some funds in your church where people might give.
We have a general fund, a building fund, a special fund. And that's both.
Is that what it's called, special fund?
It's called, it's a sub, it's, under special funds, we have people who give like the Samaritan's Purse.
Oh, so that's more than one fund? then?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's a combination of smaller ones, but then we have our Faith Promise Fund.
Okay. Yeah, some churches are still keeping
I
track.
understand that all goes, does that all go to EFM now? When we send it in on the
Yeah,
forward
and,
one?
and that comes, doesn't that come through EFCR and then goes on to EFM now if somebody sends in Faith Promise money?
It depends, we can talk more about that,
Yeah.
specifics.
But the point is, that might be a separate fund, and then you decide what to do with it, okay? The general fund is usually what you're concerned with when you're talking about the church budget. Okay? Because that is where you have decided as a church what your ministry is going to be and how the ministry dollars that you receive and spend are in line with your ministry, your mission, and your vision. Okay? That's why you set up a budget. Ed talked a little bit ago in the meeting about the budget that we're going to be working on next week. But the general fund is actually considering the budget. That's the money coming in that's not going to a specific place, but is funding the budget, funding mainly the ministry of the church. And then you have other funds, we've listed a few, that we usually call designated funds. Those have been designated for a specific purpose. If it's undesignated money, that's part of the general. Okay. Now, under each one of those funds, you have accounts. So under the general fund, you would have income accounts for how does the money come in. Might be offerings. Some churches now separate if they get certain fees that they charge for events or something, so that they can track that separately from just offerings. Because when you report your annual report, the fair share is only on undesignated offerings, so that you're not having to be taxed proportion. The fair share doesn't include all those other things that might go into the general fund. So you have different accounts under each fund that help you track those different things. Am I making sense? Likewise, on the expense side, under each fund, you have expense accounts. So you have income accounts, you have expense accounts. They all are tied into a specific fund. Okay. So, it's important when we again talk about the financial sector and who counts the money, that all begins with, are they recording the funds properly as they come in order to honor the donor's wishes, as well as to satisfy internal revenue, that you are honoring those wishes and only spending it on what they have designated it for or not designated it for. So it starts with whoever are the counting, is counting the offering, that they are consistent in using the same funds as your financial secretary and your treasurer. Now that takes some coordination, that takes some investment of training to get sometimes those people all on the same page. But that's why I put in here part of internal control is, this is another one that I've run into several times, is the flow between offering and how it is recorded. So you need to have the fund process settled. We are about out of time. Under best practices, I'm just going to comment real quick. Those are some of the things that I would be aware of. Those people that you have asked to be your finance people, whether they're the treasurer or whatever they do, have they been given some training? Do they have a job description? Do they know where to get help? That is a problem a lot of times, especially when personnel change frequently. We've already talked a little bit about the budget. Is the budget coherent and reflect the mission and ministry of the church, rather than just, well, this is what we did last year? Okay. Your budget needs to be ministry driven. And then finally, under communication, this is one that I think is also very important, but is a lot of times overlooked. When you have gone through all these procedures and you are ready to give a report on what the church has done during whatever period of time, how is it going to be presented? Are they accurate reports? Are they understandable? I've worked with churches that the reports aren't accurate because they haven't reconciled the bank account or something like that. So they need to be accurate, understandable. You might have different audience levels that you're sharing this with. It's one thing to share a report with an elder board. It's another to share a report at a congregational meeting. So you should have different levels of reporting. I also encourage treasurers to learn how to, what I call, interpret reports. That means when you present the report, no matter what audience you're presenting the report to, that you're doing some interpretation. Where did the money come from? How was it used this month? How does it compare to what we said we were going to spend in the budget? You're interpreting some of those numbers. Then reporting. I think we've kind of gotten away a little bit sometimes of what we report in our finances. When I was a church administrator, we still had a monthly newsletter. Some churches still do that online, I know. But what we tried to do when we reported the finances, we just didn't report this much came in, this much came out. But we reported it in such a way that we celebrated it, that because of your generosity, we were able to do such and such this month, in addition to our regular ministries. Or because you were faithful in your giving, our VBS was fully funded. Something like that. But we're celebrating it as part of the reporting, and we're celebrating it in line with the mission of the church so that we're healthy. Okay, here is your checklist. This is going for you to, this is for you to take home and work with maybe somebody else in your finance area to come up with that checklist. And that is your checkup time. On here we have put a real quick answer to the question, but we also have given you the resource where to find that. They are these documents that we handed out here. Also some references to Internal Revenue publications. We are, as a finance team, are asking that each church take that very seriously. That you take that as a checkup time, that you take it kind of as a test to see how you are doing in your church financial procedures, and if there's anything that you maybe need to work on. And then the bottom line is, on the bottom of your handout, is if you have any question on any of those areas or anything else that you ever need help with in terms of your financial procedures, my contact information is on there. Don't be afraid to contact me, text me, email me, and we'll do the best to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to answer one question that was asked, and which was, does all of our mission money now go to EFM? And the answer is no. So hopefully that you understand that Eastern Region, our fair share covers about half of our budget, but the Great Commission giving still covers the other half. And a good rule of thumb would be, if 3% goes to fair share, if you're able to do another 3% of your undesignated giving, that would fund the rest of our spending plan. So that's a good rule of thumb. So if you're able to do 3% and another 3%, if your church gives $4,000 for fair share giving, if you're able to give another $4,000 to Great Commission giving, that would help fund us. Then in addition, then if you have additional funds that for missions, then we encourage you to do EFM. So a number of our churches have been reallocating how much goes to Great Commission budget and how much goes to EFM. Again, if there's special offerings, like the Easter offering, Christmas offering that are for EFM, all of that should go to EFM 100%. But hopefully it's still a little fuzzy in our churches' minds exactly how that plays out. We're going to continue to communicate and try to do that. If we can talk to you one-on-one, that would be very helpful. But again, thank you so much. Tim, thank you so much, and really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing great resources. You have about 5 minutes to get to your next workshop. Unless you're doing the next one here, then you don't have far to go.